Hi, this is Steve, K8BZ, and if you've been following along with these presentations, you're at a point now where we can use Outpost Packet Message Manager to contact the bulletin boards to send and receive messages, such as we would in an emergency communications network. So we're going to open Outpost Packet Message Manager, and we're going to set up a couple of things in it in order to do that. You already know how to send and receive messages to a bulletin board using a dumb terminal program, and you already know the three message types of private message, bulletin messages, and national traffic system messages that can be stored on a bulletin board. You should already know who has the rights to list and read those messages and to delete the messages. And if you don't have that knowledge from the previous exercises, I highly recommend you go back and get familiar with those concepts before you continue on with this. If you jump ahead, you can probably make this work, but you won't understand it, and if you have to be a little flexible and versatile, you're going to lack some of the foundational knowledge you'll need to do that. So those are assumptions that we're making in this presentation, that you already have that knowledge. You know how to get into a bulletin board, you know the three message types, and know who can list, read, and delete those various message types. So with that knowledge in mind, we're going to go up here to the Setup tab. Now we've already set up our TNC, but we're just going to look at that again. This is where you go into the TNC setup using Control-T, or just selecting it from the menu. And we're just going to look at this tab again. We already set up our TNC here. Remember in that video we just called it the model number of the TNC. It's a KPC3 Plus is the TNC. We'll need to find that when we set up our bulletin board, so we'll know what TNC we're going to use to do that. So we go back to the setup menu. The next item here is bulletin board. Setting up the bulletin board we want to connect to. Now you can do that. You can pull up that window from the menu here, or you can use the shortcut Control B. So we'll use the shortcut. I'm just going to go down and click in the window, hold the Control key, push the letter B. It brings up the BBS setup window. Now I'm going to delete the BBS that's in here right now so we can reset it up. Okay. Now when you open yours for the first time, in your window here it's going to say choose or create a bulletin board. Now the recorder program I use kind of interferes with popping these windows open, so sometimes I have to do it a couple times. I already have several bulletin boards set up in here. You can have any number of them you want, but we're going to set up a brand new one to show you how to do that. So we're going to click the new button, and it's going to ask for a friendly name. Now this should be a name that will help you identify what bulletin board you're talking about. So in my case, it's just going to be, whoops, let me take the caps lock off, Gladwin Aries Races BBS. The connect name is going to be the bulletin board call sign, W8GDW-1. Description, you can put a further description in here if you want. In BBS type, we're going to let Outpost determine the BBS and set up the prompts. The BBS is using a Cantronics TNC with the standard BBS prompts for listing messages. Remember we went over how to list messages. You can selectively list messages using list mind, list traffic, list bulletin. Again, if you're not familiar with those concepts, please go back and review that video. Don't, skip ahead to this if you want, but you're missing required knowledge you need to use this system to its most effectiveness. Okay, so we're going to let Outpost determine the BBS prompts. It already knows what prompts are required for all of the standard TNCs, and it will get that for you. Now we have to tell it what TNC we're going to use. There's only one TNC configured for this in Outpost, but you could, let's say for example, you may have a station set up in your EOC, and your operators, this is a really hypothetical situation. Let's say your operators are required to bring their own TNC. And there are 3 operators that are authorized to do that, and they have 3 different TNCs, and they have a little bit of variance in in how they are set up. Well, in most cases, we're only going to have the one. So when we click this window, there's only one to pick from in this list. If we're not going to use these are Telnet and JNOS. For telnetting in, we're not going to train on that. I don't recommend it, but you can do it if you want. But we just select the TNC that we're using that's already configured in the TNC configuration. We'll click apply and OK, and now you'll see that TNC name that we put in the TNC configuration window shows up right here. These other tabs, until we get to the end, you don't need to do anything with them. That's the standard command set that comes pre-filled. We're not going to describe any of the initial commands or the commands to send after a receive session. I'll do that in a later video, but we do need to know something about the path. We have a direct path to the bulletin board. I don't need to use any digital relay stations that are known as digipeaters or nodes. I'm not going to describe how to use those in this video because I haven't gone over videos and digipeaters and nodes yet. I'll do that in a subsequent video. So we're going to do this as if we have a direct connect path to the bulletin board. And that's all we have to set up. Put in the name and call sign of the bulletin board. You can go over here and tell it that we have a direct path to the bulletin board. Don't need to use digipeaters or nodes to get there. So we'll apply that, click OK. Now we also want to look in the Tools menu in the Send Receive settings. You can tell Outpost when you want it to connect to the bulletin board. If you remember in the introductory video with just basic introductory information, in an emergency communications network, all messages for all stations are sent to the bulletin board. All stations get their message from the bulletin board that's being used for the emergency communications network. All of the stations can't do that at the same time. It's no different than if you were on a net, on a voice net or some other digital net, and net control tells station A to send traffic to station B. He's not going to tell three different stations to send their traffic on the same frequency at the same time. That same situation applies here. So you could either schedule send receive times, and in this case it's every 30 minutes, but I could schedule it every 5 minutes if I wanted to, or I could schedule slot times down here. Send receive times, and these are minutes after the hour. 0 minutes after the hour would be at the top of every hour, 20 minutes after the hour, and 40 minutes after the hour, and then again back at the top of the hour. An Outpost would automatically connect to the bulletin board, send any messages in your outbox, and receive any bulletins or traffic messages if you tell it you need to receive National Traffic System messages, and any private messages to you. For our demonstration right now, we're going to choose no automation, and we're going to do the send receive sessions manually by clicking this send receive button. Now, in the next tab, we want to tell it what we want to retrieve. We want to retrieve private messages for us. We want to retrieve National Traffic System messages for our demonstration. Now, in a real emergency communications network, if you weren't the National Traffic System liaison station, we would uncheck that. There's no point in taking up access time to the bulletin board, downloading National Traffic System messages if you're not the designated NTS relay station. But for our demonstration, we're going to leave that checked. We also want to retrieve bulletins. We're not going to check this session on bulletins from XNOS or JNOS areas. We are going to skip. We're going to leave this box checked that says do not retrieve National Traffic Systems that I send to the bulletin board. We don't have a need to look at our own messages because they're going to be saved in our sent folder anyways. So we're going to skip that. This one that says skip or do not retrieve bulletins you send to the BBS, I'm going to leave that unchecked. So if I send a bulletin to the bulletin board, bulletins again, as you remember, go to all stations. If I send a bulletin, I'm actually going to download that same bulletin. There's a reason for that, and I'll explain it when the time comes. Now, that may not be true in all cases, but for certain specific cases, you should take the time to download your own bulletins. The reason you do that is because you cannot delete your bulletins from the bulletin board unless you have them downloaded into Outpost. You can delete them from a dumb terminal if you connect to the bulletin board. But if you have your slot time, you don't want to be using up bulletin board time in someone else's time slot. So I'll explain that further. It'll make more sense later on. So we're good to go there. So I'm going to apply that, click close. So I'm going to do a Control B and bring this up. This is the bulletin board window again. In our pick list, we already have the bulletin board that we configured here in Gladwin. We have a direct path to the bulletin board, just doing a little review here. In our identification window, right now we're not using tactical calls, we're using our own call sign. We set this up way back in the beginning when we were setting up our initial connection to the TNC. If this is a little fuzzy, you might want to go back and review that section. So we have our call sign set up. Let's do a send receive session to the bulletin board. And when I click that, there's a whole bunch of stuff scrolling across the screen. Most of that was just monitored packets on the frequency that have nothing to do with what we're doing right now. Now I'm gonna freeze this and zoom in for just a minute. Now that froze that. So that's not going to continue to scroll. When we connected to the bulletin board, Outpost, that if you heard that chime, that's because this send receive session continued through the process and it actually downloaded a message from the bulletin board. But getting back to this, in this packet message manager window, you saw all that stuff scroll across the screen. Outpost is taking charge of sending all the necessary commands to the bulletin board to do what you want it to do. Remember, in the dumb terminal program, you had to do that yourself. Outpost is doing that for you. One of the first things it does on every send receive session is it sets your TNC clock to the system clock for your computer. The daytime command, see the command prompt at the daytime command, that's the command for setting the clock in your TNC. It's going to make sure your clock is set to your computer system time. Make sure the clock in your computer is set to the correct time. This represents 2016, 04 is the month of April, 03 is the third day of April, the time is 08:37 hours local time and 1 second. So that's the format for setting the clock in your TNC. When you send messages, especially formal National Traffic System messages, it's going to timestamp those messages with the time in your TNC. And when you receive messages, it's time stamping those with the time in your TNC. And that is a relatively important thing that needs to be done. So you need to make sure your system clock is set correctly. Outpost takes care of setting the clock in your TNC for you. At the next command prompt, it sent the connect message to our bulletin board. This is the sign-in message for the bulletin board. The same message we would get if we connected to the bulletin board in IP serial using the dumb terminal. Then it goes through the series of list commands. Now we had, back in our pick list there of downloading from the bulletin board we did just a minute ago, we told it we want to receive personal messages for us. We get those from the list my command. It's going to list any messages addressed to K8BZ. Then we told it we want to also download formal traffic messages. Remember, in our bulletin board video, LT is list traffic. There are no traffic messages, so we got another input prompt. Then we told it we want to download bulletins from the bulletin board. So it did a list bulletin here. And then, now, because there is a bulletin, it listed the bulletin. And if this wouldn't have frozen, you would have seen where it actually downloaded and read that bulletin. So we'll zoom back out. That send receive session is over. I'm going to look in the in tray, and lo and behold, here's a bulletin. Just to complete the demonstration, I'm going to delete all messages, and we'll get rid of that bulletin again. Well, let me wait. I'm going to do that again in just a minute. I'm going to leave the bulletin. We'll do another send receive session. Something that Outpost will do that you can't, another thing that Outpost will do that won't happen in a dumb terminal. Listing traffic, it's listing bulletins. It listed the bulletin, and now it sent the B command just to disconnect. It didn't tell it to read that bulletin. Outpost knows that you already have this bulletin, so it's not going to download it a second time. If you were doing this in a dumb terminal, and if you already had 3 operational periods under your belt, and you'd look at all the list of messages in the dumb terminal and say, oh my gosh, did I already get that bulletin? I don't know. Let me go find it. Where did I save it? Did I save it in a text file? Did I save it here? Where did I put it? Outpost knows you already have that bulletin. So let's delete it, and we're going to do that one more time. We're going to delete all messages saved in Outpost on the computer, do another send receive session. So now that it's gone, it will download that bulletin this time. Okay, so it listed the bulletin. Now it did the R command for read a message and the message number. It's downloaded the bulletin. We heard the chime. It did the disconnect. The send receive session window disappeared after the send receive session. Now in the in tray, here's our bulletin. And we can open the bulletin. Okay, so here's the message. It tells you it's a bulletin message, what bulletin board it was received from, what station sent it, who it was addressed to. The subject is this bulletin board, and it tells a little bit about the bulletin board, where it's located, and welcomes people to use it if they would like to. Now we're in the in tray. We're all done with that message. We're not going to delete it, assuming this is a real emergency network. We're just going to archive it. So now that's going to be down here in the archive folder. So we're back in the in tray. Let's create a new message to send to the bulletin board. You do that with the new button up here. When I click that, it's going to open up this message maker window. I'll repeat again. There are 3 types of messages you can send to a bulletin board. Private messages from station to station, bulletin messages to all stations, National Traffic System messages that all stations can read. And again, you should have a firm understanding of who can read them and who can delete those messages. So let's create a bulletin. So when you open this window, by default, it's going to assume you want to send a private message. So if you want to send anything other than a private message from station to station, you need to select the message type you want to send. When you point at them with the mouse, it's going to show you what those are. That's a National Traffic System message. This is set message as bulletin, set message as private. So we're going to make it bulletin, and you'll see down here in this yellow bar it changed to bulletin message. We're going to flag that as urgent. This is something you can't do in a dumb terminal program. This is a strictly an Outpost packet message manager feature. We're going to flag that as urgent. Urgent messages show up in red on the message list in the in tray window. So we're going to send this to all stations. And the subject, let's go back here to send it to all. Subject is going to be TAC calls and slot times. Now, as I explained before, all the stations have to access the bulletin board in their slot times, just like any other network. If it's a voice network, the net control isn't going to tell 3 stations to send their traffic on the same frequency at the same time. They're going to have to go one at a time. If you're in a digital network, 3 digital stations can't be on the same frequency at the same time sending their traffic. Now you can have a net control coordinate all that, or you can let Outpost be your net control and have a sysop tell all of the stations what their designated slot times are. Now those designated slot times and TAC calls are specific for one operational period. If you've had any NIMS training, you will know that operational periods are generally 12 hours long. A communications plan and the operational plan is only for that operational period, because the situation changes from operational period to operational period. In one operational period, you may need a packet station at incident command, a shelter, and the EOC, and in the next operational period, maybe you don't need the shelter anymore. The shelter is closed and those people either went back home or went somewhere else, but the situation isn't totally over. We still need stations at incident command and the EOC, for example. So every operational period has a communications plan overall for all of the responders. Amateur radio can be a part of that, and the amateur radio representative to the communications unit leader needs to coordinate with that person to get those slot times. And it doesn't matter if you're using packet or what you're using, voice networks or anything else. Everybody needs to know what the communications plan is and where they fit into that communications plan for that operational period. But let's say the amateur radio representative to the communications unit leader is saying slot times and PAC calls for the next operational period. Okay. So we're going to have the location, TAC call, slot times. Okay. First location is going to be Emergency Operations Center. Their TAC call is going to be EOC, and the slot times are minutes after the hour. Now, we're assuming the shelter is closed, so we only need two. We would need one at the EOC and one at Incident Command. So the EOC is going to be at 0 minutes after the hour. We want to allot about 5 minutes is all they need to get messages in and out of the bulletin board. So at 0 minutes after the hour, you can contact. At 5 minutes after, that's going to be Incident Command's time. So it's going to be 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And then next one is going to be Incident Command. Their TAC call is just going to be IC, and their slot times are going to be 5 minutes after the EOC. So their slot times are going to be 5, 15, 25, 35, 40, 45, and 55. And it's going to be signed, if I could type, John Doe, Amateur Radio Communications Unit Leader Rep. Okay, so we're sending this as a bulletin message, and it's going to be flagged as urgent. One of the common mistakes that people make is that they intend to send a bulletin, but they send it as a private message. If you didn't select bulletin here, if I sent this as a private message, now I clicked private, now it's showing private message. If I sent that as a private message, remember back in the bulletin board video, when you do the list command, you will only list messages addressed to your call sign or bulletins or National Traffic System messages. If I send this as a private message, it's going to be sent to the call sign all, ALL. Unless your call sign is ALL, you won't be able to list, view, or read the message. That's one of the most common mistakes people use in packet, is they think they're sending a bulletin because they addressed it to all, but they sent it as a private message. We've got to make sure we send that as a bulletin. Now we're going to click send. That message now resides in the out tray, and we can open it, take another look at it. So it's in the out tray. So let's take another look up here in the tools menu. Remember, we said we were going to retrieve our own bulletins. So this is going to send that bulletin to the bulletin board, then it's going to receive it back off the bulletin board. And this is a demonstration of why we want to receive that off the bulletin board. So it's sending that message to the bulletin board. Bulletin board's receiving it. It's acknowledging all the packets, checking them for errors. Now it's doing the list my command to see if there are any messages for K8BZ. It's listing traffic. Now it's going to list bulletins, and it's going to show 2 bulletins. Now the bulletin number 116 we already have, so it's not going to re-download that bulletin. That bulletin is down here in the archive folder. Outpost knows if you received messages already, it's not going to download the same bulletin twice. If I deleted that, it would receive both of the bulletins. So that one's in the archive folder. This one's in the in tray. And actually, I'm going to delete all messages, and we're going to do that whole session over again and retrieve both of those. See how that's in red? That's because it was an urgent bulletin. Let's delete all messages. Let's do another send receive session. This time we don't need to send a bulletin, but we'll receive them. Now, it shows there are 3 messages on the bulletin board. There's one there that won't even list because it's not a bulletin and it's not addressed to K8BZ. I have no right to see it. There's the first message. Here comes the next bulletin. So in that brief period of time, which wasn't probably 20 seconds, maybe, received these 2 bulletins off the bulletin board. They weren't lengthy messages at all, but you can imagine in our 5-minute slot time, we could have probably received 20 messages or more of that length in our allotted 5-minute slot time. Or we could have received 5 or 6 that length and several lengthy messages in addition to that. Now to view these messages, we're going to click the first one, click open, and this is the first bulletin. It just tells a little bit about the bulletin board and encourages people to use it. So we're all set there. So I just moved this down a little so we could see the list, so it wasn't covering up the list. In the list here, all messages that were flagged as urgent appear in red. Now that's an Outpost Packet Message Manager feature. It's not something that you can do with a dumb terminal. It sends a little bit of data along with the message that Outpost interprets as an urgent message and displays it in red in the in tray. Let me close this window and get it out of the way. It also displays messages that have not been read in bold. That's a little bit difficult to see because the list is so short. If that was a longer list, you'd see the message in red is in bold font. Let me open it. There's our TAC calls. Now if I close that, when you look at the list, it's no longer in bold. That shows that you are already opened that bulletin and read it. Now I'm going to open it again. Now this is the bulletin that we downloaded. Again, we only want to leave that on the bulletin board as long as it takes for these stations to get it. One of the ways that we can use for the station to tell if the station's got the message, and actually I'm going to copy all this. I'm just going to drag the mouse over it, do a right click, and copy all that text. And let me actually do the whole thing over again. I'm going to create another bulletin, make it urgent, and I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to request a read receipt, or a delivery receipt. A delivery receipt will be generated by Outpost whenever a station downloads a bulletin. So let's take a look at this. It's making it urgent because I selected that option. I selected bulletin message, and I also selected delivery receipt requested. Now that happens up here in the actions menu. Request delivery receipt. Going to go to all stations, subject, TAC calls, and slot times. And I'm just going to do a paste operation. It's the same bulletin. It's now in the out tray. I'm going to do one more send receive session. The reason I'm doing this is I want to show you this delivery receipt feature. I forgot to select that option on the first time I sent this bulletin. So it's sending the bulletin again. It's looking for traffic, looking for bulletins. It's going to list all the bulletins. There is a new one there the second time I sent this same slot time message. Now now Outpost just sent this delivery receipt. It's going to come back to me when I do another send receive session. Now let's go up in the in tray. Now I have this. See how this one's bold? That's the second one that I sent. I'll open it. Same message. Okay, now let's do another send receive session, and now I will get a delivery receipt. So I'll know who received this message. Anytime anyone downloads that bulletin, because I requested a delivery receipt, Outpost will automatically create one and post it on the bulletin board. So the next time you connect, you will see who received your messages, because you will get this delivery receipt. We'll open it. It says your message was delivered to KBZ, and this tells you what message it was, TAC calls and slot times. So once I receive a delivery receipt from all of the stations in the network, then I can expire the bulletin. And let me show you how to do that. We're going to reopen the bulletin, and now there's an extra tab on it that says expire. I'm going to click that, and that is going to prompt you, make sure you want to delete that bulletin from the bulletin board. Yes, we do. Now I'm going to go down and do the same thing on the next one, and we'll expire that. So the next time your slot time comes up and you do another send receive session, remember the command to delete a message from the bulletin board. It's the kill, or K command. It already says K176. It's going to kill it. K175, it's killing that bulletin. So both of those bulletins are being deleted from the bulletin board. That happens automatically. You just look for the delivery receipts. When you get them, go in, click expire, and it will delete those bulletins from the bulletin board. Now they still exist here in Outpost. This is just in your computer, in excuse me, in your file system in your computer. So all these messages are in our in tray, nothing in our out tray. Here's the messages that we have sent since I deleted everything. Draft messages, deleted messages. So all of these we're done with. We can send all these to the archive folder, and they will reside in the archive folder until the end of the emergency operation. And then at the end of the emergency operation, when we stand down, I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'm going to export all folders. And I'm going to export all those folders to the desktop. And I am going to give it a name, emergency exercise. And I'm going to save it. It saved it. Now let's go look at the desktop. There's emergency exercise. Now that's not a text file. If you try to open that, it's not going to find a program that opens in. It's an Outpost file. So it can't figure out what to open that in. So let's go back here to Outpost. Now I'm going to go back here and delete all messages. So all of these messages are deleted, and then I'm going to go over here to import. Let's take a look. I deleted all the messages. All these trays are empty. Okay. Go back here to import, and I'm going to go to the desktop, and we are going to find the emergency exercise file, and we're going to open it. Okay, now when we get to the sent file, there's our message again. We get to the archive file, there's all our messages. So once the incident is over, we're going to take all of the messages, export them to this file, and we're going to copy that file to a zip drive, give it to the emergency coordinator, and he will have all of the messages that every station sent in that exercise. He can open them all one at a time and view them. He can also give a copy, if it was a RACES activation, to the county emergency manager. And if someone requests under the Freedom of Information Act something that was the official government response, which it is in a RACES situation, they may request some of those messages. And they would have a means, with the assistance of the county amateur radio emergency coordinator, to retrieve the messages and provide them in a review that they may make, or through a Freedom of Information Act request, where they're required to provide that information upon request. So that's a brief explanation of how this is used. Now I'm going to continue on mostly with Outpost, and I'm going to go over the features in detail in Outpost in the upcoming videos for doing lots of other things. But with this alone, you should be able to get in and send and receive messages, private messages, bulletin messages, National traffic system messages, I'm going to make that a video all its own. There's a little more to that than just bulletins and private messages. And I'm also going to explain TAC calls, how to use a tactical call, and why you want to use tactical calls in an emergency communications network and not your personal call, and how that's done, and how the legal requirements for identification are met when you're using tactical call signs. Outpost handles that for you. You don't have to worry about doing anything for your legal identification. And that concludes this video. So as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me at k8bz@arrl.net, and we will definitely do everything we can to help you out with using Outpost and organizing and functioning in a packet emergency communications network. Thank you.